After my diagnosis, I wrote all 3 of my children personal letters, saying all the things I should have said and all the things I wouldn't be here to say. I tucked the letters away in an old jacket pocket, deep in my closet. After my son was born 2 years ago, in the follow-up room 12 weeks post-delivery, I was looking at all the posters on the wall and the pamphlets on the tables about self-breast exams. I started thinking about my grandmother who passed away from breast cancer. And when the resident came in, I asked, "Should I get a mammogram?" She said, "Well, they're not really telling people to do it until you're 50 now." I was only 40, but I wanted to get one. I delayed though. I was busy. I finally got my first mammogram in June, followed by a second, and then an ultrasound. And then a biopsy. When they told me I had breast cancer, the only thing I thought was, what's going to happen to my kids? And if this was something that I have passed on to them. So after genetic testing, I got the results. I was negative for HER2 and the BRCA gene. I lost my dad when I was 9. And what bothered me worse than having cancer was thinking about my own children growing up without me and being in denial like I was until early adulthood. It's been one complication after the next, from my first surgery to my 7th. One day, I noticed London coming from my bedroom. I could tell she was upset. I said, "What's wrong?" She acted defensive. When she finally told me, she said she'd found the letters, and she had read all of them. She asked, "Are you going to die, Mom?" "No, London. I just wanted you to know how important you are to me and how much I love you." I talked to my girls about my cancer several times. I also told them they need to get mammograms yearly, starting at the age of 30. Sophie turned to me quickly and said, "Every year?" I just laughed. Anytime I talk to my friends about the importance of having regular mammograms, I think about my son and how he saved my life. Without him, I wouldn't have been sitting in that OBGYN's exam room with all the posters on the walls and the pamphlets calling to me to get a mammogram. I still have the letters I wrote my kids, just in case.
My husband and I never missed a game. Never. Did I know what a rushing yard was? No. But as a parent, your child's passions become your passions. At least mine did. I must have looked at my phone and seen the date. September 15th. It jumped out at me. The day my dad passed away 14 years before from a car accident. I thought, oh my goodness, I was also diagnosed 1 year ago today. And I didn't tell a soul. I just sat there and processed it. I had gone for a mammogram, had a lump I needed to get checked out. Nothing new. I get them often. But I'll never forget the words my doctor said on this particular visit. "It's aggressive. We need to treat it aggressively, and I need you to be aggressive with it." This thing came out of nowhere. His words gave me the fight I needed. Game face on. Will to live activated. My son was the only thing running through my mind when I received my diagnosis. I don't have time to be sick. I'm not done living. I'm not through raising my son. I want to see him graduate. I can't leave my husband to finish this on his own. This isn't how our story is supposed to end. We often don't realize how strong we are until being strong is our only choice. My mom is my leading example of strength and grace through the storm. She reminded me, you know who God uses for these trials, Kelly? He uses his strongest soldiers because they can weather the battle. What's my inspiration? My faith. Peace surpasses all understanding. God told me he'd see me through this, and he'd be by my side the entire way. But he needed me to walk this path so that I could help others. It was fall again. School was in full swing. Football season had just begun. My son had taken his place on the field. My husband and I had just taken our seats in the stands. I remember the band playing in the background. The smell of popcorn filled the air. A fall breeze swept through. I glanced at my phone. It was September 15th again. And that is my victory.
Hang on. Let's go. Everybody else go. Cross it over.
I remember reading, worrying is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it gets you nowhere. I felt like my mom worried too much about things that were never going to happen, so I try not to worry. My mother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. When I took her to the doctor, she told us that if it was genetic, it would be fast and furious. If it wasn't, she'd have some time. Mom passed less than 4 months later. She had the ATM gene that affects your breast, pancreas, and uterus. The oncology group in Kingsport asked if I'd get genetic testing done. I didn't want to miss work, but I said yes. Afterwards, they called and said, "Can you come in and talk to us?" I said no, but I know I've got that gene. And I do. They said I could have bilateral mastectomies. I said I won't do that if I don't have cancer. So they asked if I would do some MRIs. I like to joke around, y'all, and that was funny. Climbing up on that machine and putting my AA through high school, finally B-size boobs up there. Gaining weight has its advantages. They called and told me they'd found breast cancer. I'm telling you, Ballard was Johnny on the spot. They already had me set up for the abdominal MRI, which was clean, but the 3D mammogram showed cancer. I could have done a lumpectomy or just one mastectomy, but so many people do the lumpectomy or just one breast and the cancer comes back. I chose the bilateral. I asked my daughter and son to get tested. My son doesn't want to know. My daughter did get tested and she doesn't have the gene. Praise the Lord. My family tree is huge as far as cancer goes, so I encourage people to have their mammograms and get their genetic testing. Mother, like I said, was a warrior, and Daddy had liver cancer. My paternal grandmother had breast and uterine cancer at the same time. And there's more on Mama's side. I see the same oncologist as my mom did, and when I went for my checkup, she said, "I want you to know your mom and genetic testing saved your life." A couple months later, and it would have been a different story. She thinks my cancer will be back, so we're going to stay on top of it. My dad was almost 91. Mama was almost 80. I'm 60. I ain't going to worry about it. We're just going to go on. So my coping mechanisms, my Jack Russell, kayaking down the Boone Lake, and fly fishing. You might be a redneck if you fly fish in a semi-formal dress. And like I said, joking around and trying not to worry too much.
I was working that night. My dad called me. Daddy doesn't usually call, Mother does. So I excused myself and called him right back. He said, "Your mother has cancer." My brain went into overdrive. She had always been there for me, and I was still healing from my recent divorce. I've always said that I didn't need to worry about anything. All I needed to do was talk to my mother and let her pray about it for me, and then everything would be all right. I couldn't imagine her gone. In April of 2015, Mother went in for her annual mammogram. And a few days later, the dreaded letter arrived to contact her gynecologist. My mother volunteers at the local hospital. And when she ran into a doctor she knew from church, she asked him if she could see him about her test results. He performed a biopsy and called her with the results the very same day. He said, "Unfortunately, there are cancer cells." Before the surgery, our minister and Dr. Connor prayed with our family and friends in the waiting room. And then we waited. I felt in my heart that God was hearing our prayers. I remember taking up track in high school and decided I was going to start running. My dad said, "I think I'll run with you." And my mother said, "I can't run, but I'm going to walk." So we kind of all started together. My parents have always been healthy, eating right, exercising. And every time she went in for her radiation treatment after the surgery, Mother found herself looking at the wellness center across the parking lot. She only wished that she could be there for her water aerobics class. Today, there is no evidence of disease. My sister and I go for our regular mammograms, but I have not had genetic testing. I do worry for my daughter, though, because both of her grandmothers have had breast cancer. I encouraged her to be diligent about testing, not only for herself, but for her daughters. My mother celebrated her 83rd birthday recently. She continues to crochet her love into baby blankets, not only for her own great-grandchildren, but also to welcome all the new babies at church. Her 10th great-grandchild is due any day now. We are blessed. She's still here and healthy.
My first thought was, what do I tell John? They had called me at work to say, The doctor wants to talk to you about your CT scan. And I'm like, great, I have to leave work early to go find out that there's nothing wrong. So I walked in and the doctor said, the radiologist found cancer, and they think it's ovarian and that it has spread. I've always been aware of my body. I recognize every little pain and I need to know what causes it. I want to trust doctors, but I know my body best, and I know when something isn't right. Before the pain started in my abdomen, I was spending a lot of time with my son Jason. He had returned from fighting in Afghanistan with PTSD, and he was suffering. We were eating a lot of ice cream because that's just what we do. And I started having this really bad pain on my right side, so I assumed it was the ice cream. After a couple of weeks, I was home. I was back at work, the pain now so severe that it hurt just to talk or laugh. To tell me not to talk or laugh is like telling me not to breathe. The ER doc scheduled an ultrasound for my gallbladder. She said, clearly it's not an emergency or you would be hanging onto the ceiling. I guess I didn't react the way she thought I should if this had been more serious. I didn't know how I was going to tell my parents either. Following my recurrence of ovarian cancer, I had genetic testing. No anomalies. I was so blessed to have friends that took me to my chemo treatments every week when my husband couldn't get off from work. And the greatest blessing was that my husband and I, we've been married for 41 years now, we got even closer. Now, instead of going our separate ways when we get home from work, we sit together and we hold hands as we talk about the day. It's also brought us even closer to God and our faith. I think we understand now that we can't do life on our own. We need other people. We need God. But I still need to stand up for myself. Jason is gone now. But my other son, Chris, often wears a t-shirt that says, "My mom survived ovarian cancer."
We were in the sewing room where she had made my gorgeous wedding dress when she told me the news. I was devastated and scared by the thought that she might die. Mom was extremely talented, intelligent, and always put others before herself. She was a caretaker. She worked as a family nurse practitioner for over 40 years and helped me get through nursing school. She'd even quiz me to help me get through my exams. At age 58, she found a lump in her left breast when performing a self-breast exam and was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer. Second-degree radiation burns left her chest, requiring daily dressing changes. As an RN, I was the one who changed them for her every day, and it was painful for her and for me. I'd cry after each dressing change, but not in front of her. Then I'd get mad. Why did this have to happen? Why my mom? Why make it so painful? But I learned from her, you can't ask why, but rather ask God for the strength to get through it. This was the first time that I had taken care of my mom rather than her taking care of me. All my life. Her husband Carol and my husband Jim and other family members kept the house going so she could take her mind off things that she couldn't do. After the axillary lymph nodes were removed, she developed lymphedema in her left arm. It was so swollen she couldn't do much sewing. But follow-up tests revealed no evidence of cancer. After her treatment, my mother resumed her passion of sewing for the next 12 years. My beautiful, brilliant mother passed away a few years ago at 73 from a different form of cancer. She could make anything and had tried to teach me to sew when I was a kid. She even bought me a kid-sized sewing machine, but I never really got the hang of it. I still have this quilt she made that hangs on the wall in our guest bedroom. Sometimes I go in there and look at it, and the memories make me laugh. I see Mom when I look at so many things, and I miss how her hugs made everything better. I never picked up her talent for sewing, but I am who I am today because of her. I honor her every year by getting my mammogram, and I honor her every day by being a nurse.
Being diagnosed with cancer wasn't the worst thing in my life. I lived with a broken heart ever since my son Nick was diagnosed with autism at age 2.5. My daughter was getting ready to move to another state for her master's, and Nick was finally, surprisingly, going to college. We had just published our first book, ready to launch and start a book tour. Everything seemed perfect until a routine mammogram test revealed a tumor. My husband is a doctor. He got the results from his friend who thought the tumor was tiny. And for that type of cancer, it would have been easy to miss. It was invasive lobular carcinoma. The news of the tumor was more of a shock for my husband than for me, since I didn't have any risk factors for breast cancer. I always took care of my eating habits and exercise, but deep inside me, I knew the many years of worrying about my son had taken a toll on my body. The worst thing for me was hearing my mom cry and seeing my daughter cling to my shoulders as she cried. I told them I wasn't going to die. With this diagnosis, I didn't want to suffer like I did with Nick's. And instead of resisting it, I accepted it and surrendered. I wanted my children's lives to be as normal as possible. My husband and I had many discussions after the diagnosis, and one of them, he told me, "I don't want you boobs. I want you alive." Our culture teaches us your breast is part of being feminine. All that didn't matter now. The priority was my life. I needed a bilateral mastectomy. People ask, how can you not be bothered by being flat-chested? Really easy. Boobs versus life. When I look at my flat chest and scars, I visualize the world, life, and each of the scars. Being able to get up every day and see the people I love was worth all the physical pain. Having a positive attitude really helped me heal and have a better outcome. I didn't want to fight cancer. I wanted to know as much about it and use my energy to stay alive. In the end, we're all gonna die. We just don't know how.
We had great plans for the year. Lots of sports, band, and fall activities for my high school senior. My oldest was settling into college, and we were welcoming our first international exchange student. So when they called to tell me my mammogram was suspicious, my first thought was, I don't have time for this. In the weeks before we could confirm my diagnosis, each time I turned on the radio or pulled up my phone and my music popped on, there was a song about storms. I can't remember where I was when I told my husband. All I remember is his face, his eyes, his words when he looked at me and said, Lenore, I want you more than I want your boobs. We'll do what we have to do. And this was before we even knew if it was cancer. My mom had 2 different kinds of breast cancer, 8 years apart, and then metastatic disease 8 years later. She survived 15 more years. Before I got the results of the biopsy, I knew. When my doctor called and said, I have some news, are you alone? I said, yes, but it's okay. I know what you're going to say. And she asked, how could you know? I told her about the music with the storms. And she said, you know, in the scriptures there are a lot of storms, and they always come to an end. You can't avoid them. You have to go through them. And I told God, if I have to go through this, make it count for something. Occasionally, we had suggested that my mom get genetically tested. I have 70 first cousins. My mom had 4 daughters, 9 granddaughters, and 5 great-granddaughters. If there's a positive gene in there somewhere, it would have helped the rest of us girls to know. But like my mom, I never got around to it. I worried that information could be used against me by my insurance company. I didn't know what it would change for me, so I never educated myself. After my cancer was diagnosed, genetic testing revealed I had the CHEK2 mutation. It's related to breast, colon, and prostate cancer. So it's significant for the men in our family, too. Instead of being confining, knowing I have this gene has been freeing. When I went to have surgery, I said, I want them gone. I want to lower my risk as much as possible. I've almost made it through my storm. Now I want to use my experience to educate and support other people. I learned that any blood relative of mine could get tested for the CHEK2 mutation for free. So many people in my family got tested that the Genetics Center in Kingsport jokingly said that they're going to name a wing after me. That definitely counts for something.